My name is Caroline Bennett, and I am going to tell you something that I have only told three people in my entire life: my sister Ruth, my therapist, Dr. Angela Morris, and God, in the specific late night way that is less prayer and more desperate conversation with someone you hope is listening. I am telling you now because I believe stories like mine need to be spoken out loud. Not because they are comfortable, they are not comfortable, but because there are women sitting in houses right now who are living inside a version of what I lived inside for 12 years. And they need to know that the confusion they feel is not weakness. It is the appropriate response to something that has no clean explanation. My husband, Daniel Bennett, disappeared on a Wednesday morning in March 12 years ago. He did not leave a note. He did not send an email. He did not call from wherever he went to say he was going or why, or whether he was alive. He was there on a Tuesday night, sitting in his armchair in our living room in Knoxville, Tennessee, watching television, asking me if we had any of that sharp cheddar left because he wanted crackers. And then he was not there on Wednesday morning. His car was in the driveway. His wallet was on the dresser. His phone was on the kitchen counter. He had taken nothing except himself. I want you to sit with that for a moment before I continue. His wallet, his phone, his car, all there. Every practical tool a person needs to exist in the modern world, left behind in an ordinary house on an ordinary Wednesday morning, as if he had simply stepped out to check the mail and had not come back. I called the police at noon. I had spent the morning telling myself there was an explanation, that he had gone for a walk and lost track of time, that a neighbor had needed something, that there was a reason I simply hadn't thought of yet. By noon, I had run out of reasons, and I called the police and said, "My husband is missing." And the officer on the phone asked me in a kind but practiced voice whether we had argued recently, whether there was any reason he might have left voluntarily, whether he had a history of this kind of thing. I said no to all three questions. The no to the third question was completely true. Daniel had never done anything like this. He was 41 years old, and he was a high school chemistry teacher, and he coached the debate team, and he came home every day at 4:15, and he asked about sharp cheddar. He was, by every available measure, a man who was present, a man who showed up. Until he wasn't. The investigation found nothing in the first week. No activity on his bank account, the accounts we shared, the only accounts I knew about. No usage of his credit cards, no sightings. The car sat in the driveway, and the wallet sat on the dresser, and Daniel was nowhere that anyone could find him. At the end of the first month, the detective assigned to the case, a patient man named Jim Calloway, who called me every Friday for 6 months without ever having anything new to tell me, said gently that in cases like this, cases where there was no evidence of foul play and no body and no witnesses, the most statistically likely explanation was voluntary disappearance. He said, "Mrs. Bennett, I want to be honest with you. Most of the time, when an adult leaves no note and leaves no body and leaves no evidence of violence, it means they chose to leave." I said, "But his wallet, his phone." Jim said, "Sometimes people want to make sure they can't be found." I sat with that. I sat with it for a very long time. I had a daughter. Emma was 9 years old when Daniel disappeared, and she had her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and she handled his absence with the particular quiet competence of a child who has decided that falling apart is not available to her because her mother needs her to be okay. I watched her make that decision, and I loved her for it, and it broke my heart simultaneously, the way a lot of things in those years broke my heart simultaneously. I did not fall apart either. I made the same decision Emma made, or perhaps she made it because she saw me make it, which is the way children learn everything, by watching what the adults around them do when the ground disappears. I went back to work. I had been working part-time as a dental hygienist before Daniel disappeared, and I went full-time in April. I was grateful for the work, in the specific way that you are grateful for anything that gives the day a structure, when the structure you had built your life around has been removed without explanation. I filed for legal recognition of abandonment after 3 years, which Tennessee law required before I could address certain practical matters. The lawyer who handled it was professional and kind and did not ask me unnecessary questions, which I appreciated because I had been asked enough questions by then to last me a long time. I dated once, 2 years after the legal recognition, a man named Stephen who taught at Emma's school and who was gentle and sincere and who deserved someone whose whole heart was available. My whole heart was not available. It was still occupied, not by love exactly. That had changed, shifted into something I didn't have a clean word for, but by the unfinished quality of what had happened. You cannot close a door that someone else left open. You can learn to live with the draft, but the door stays open. Stephen and I ended things after 8 months. He was gracious about it. I was grateful. Emma graduated from high school. She went to the University of Tennessee. She called every Sunday, which she did because she was Emma, and Emma showed up consistently for the people she loved, which she had learned in the specific way that children learn the most important things, by watching someone do it without being asked. I kept the house on Birchwood Drive. People ask me sometimes why I stayed in the house where Daniel had been, where his armchair still sat in the living room, where his coffee mug, the blue one but the chipped handle that he refused to throw away because he said chipped mugs had character, sat on the shelf in the kitchen cabinet, exactly where he had left it. I kept the house because it was Emma's home, and then Emma left, and I kept it because it was mine, because I had earned it, in the specific way that people earn the places they have survived inside. The 12th year was the year Emma got engaged. His name was Paul, and he was a kind, solid man who looked at my daughter the way a person looks at something they understand to be the most important thing in their life, which was all I had ever required of anyone who loved her. They began planning the wedding in the spring. Emma wanted to be married in June, in the garden of the house on Birchwood Drive, which made me cry when she asked, and which I said yes to immediately. In the process of planning the wedding, Emma asked me carefully, and with the specific gentleness she used when she was approaching something difficult, whether I wanted to try one more time to find out what had happened to her father. Not to invite him to the wedding, she was clear about that. She was not interested in that conversation. But to know. She said she had spent 12 years not knowing, and that not knowing had a weight to it that she wanted to put down before she started a new chapter. I understood that completely. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, who had an office downtown and who came recommended by my lawyer as someone thorough and discreet. I told him everything: the Wednesday morning, the wallet and the phone, Jim Calloway's gentle statistical explanation. 12 years of nothing. Marcus Webb found something in 3 weeks. He found Daniel. Not in the way I had sometimes, in the deepest part of those first years, feared finding him. Not a body, not a grave, not a closed door with a permanent answer behind it. He found Daniel alive, living in Asheville, North Carolina, under his own name, which told me he had not been hiding from the law. He was 63 years old. He was working at a hardware store. He was living alone in an apartment on a street called Morrison Avenue. Marcus Webb gave me a folder with this information on a Thursday afternoon, and I sat in his office on the 4th floor of a building downtown and held it in my hands without opening it for a long time. Then I opened it. There was a photograph, taken from a distance, the kind investigators take, candid and unposed. Daniel standing outside the hardware store, in a canvas jacket, a little heavier, his hair gray where it had been brown, looking at something outside the frame of the photograph, with an expression I had seen on his face before, a specific inward expression, the one he wore when he was thinking about something he couldn't figure out how to say. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then Marcus Webb told me the rest. Daniel had a history. Before me, before Knoxville, before the chemistry classes and the debate team and the blue chipped coffee mug. A history that he had not told me about, and that I had not known to ask about, because you do not ask about the things you do not know exist. A history of what Marcus called a depressive episode of significant severity, a breakdown, in the older, plain language, at 32 years old, that had resulted in a hospitalization, a year of recovery, and a complete rebuilding of his life in a new city, which was Knoxville, which was where he had met me. What Marcus had found, through records and through a careful conversation with a woman named Patricia, who had been Daniel's therapist in Asheville for the past 8 years, was that Daniel had experienced another episode, beginning in the fall before he disappeared, worsening through the winter, and then on a Wednesday in March, he had made the decision, the fractured, ill, desperate decision of a man whose thinking was not organized around anything stable, that leaving was the only way to protect us from what was happening to him. He had believed, in the specific logic of severe depression, that we would be better without him. He had been wrong, but he had believed it. I sat in Marcus Webb's office with that information in my hands, and I felt the ground shift for the second time in 12 years. The first time it had shifted under absence. This time it shifted under something more complicated. Not forgiveness. Not yet. I was not there yet, and I was not going to pretend to be. But understanding. A small, difficult, real piece of understanding that had not been available to me for 12 years because I had not had the information. He had not left because he did not love us. He had left because he was sick, and he was not thinking clearly. And he believed, in the broken logic of that sickness, that love sometimes means removing yourself so you cannot damage the people you love most. He was wrong. He was completely wrong. The damage of leaving was larger than any damage he had imagined he was preventing. But he had not left without love. I did not contact Daniel. Emma and I talked about it for a long time. We sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, the two of us, with the garden visible through the window, where in 6 weeks she was going to be married, and we talked about what we knew and what we felt and what we wanted. Emma said, "I don't need him at the wedding. I have you. I have Paul. I have everything I need." I said, "Do you want to know him? Eventually?" She thought about it honestly, the way she always thought about hard things. "Maybe someday. Not now. Now I just needed to know the truth wasn't what I was afraid it was." I asked her what she had been afraid it was. She said, "That we weren't enough. That we weren't worth staying for." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We were always enough," I said. "He was just too sick to know it." The wedding was in June, in the garden of the house on Birchwood Drive. Emma wore my mother's pearl earrings and a dress she had found in a small shop in downtown Knoxville that fit her as if it had been made for her specific life. Paul cried at the altar, which told me everything I needed to know about him. I sat in the front row in a yellow dress, and I watched my daughter get married, and I felt, underneath the joy and the grief and the complicated layered weight of 12 years, one thing clearly. We had been enough. We had always been enough. We had proven it every ordinary day for 12 years, in a house on Birchwood Drive, with a chipped blue coffee mug on the shelf, and a garden that kept growing whether anyone tended it or not. We had been enough. We still are. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear that surviving the unexplained is one of the bravest things a person can do. Subscribe to Televera for more honest, emotional stories about the strength it takes to keep going when nothing makes sense. And leave a comment below. Have you ever had to find peace without getting the explanation you deserved? Tell us. We are here, and we are listening to every single one.